In South Korea, an unprecedented attempt to arrest a sitting president has ended in failure.
Police were blocked by hundreds of agents and soldiers, along with Yoon supporters who vowed to obstruct the arrest with their lives.
This is just one piece of a larger political crisis gripping South Korea, where a president, two acting presidents, and the leader of the ruling party have all faced or are still grappling with significant political challenges. In this episode, we're joined by reporter Lee Jungjoo with the Korean Herald to delve into the month-long political turmoil shaking the nation. It's Monday, January 6th. Last week, the first attempt to arrest President Yoon Suk-yeol failed. As we have this conversation on Monday, January the 6th, which is the last day before the arrest warrant expires, is there going to be a second attempt or extension on the warrant?
So actually, there was a big turn of events just this morning. So the second attempt was never actually made by the agency that was initially trying to initiate with the arrest warrant, but they said to the local media that they're going to ask the police to take over the execution of the warrant instead to detain the president.
Okay, so it's going to be
Yes,
transferred to a different department.
yes, that's correct. But actually, maybe department isn't the right wording to use here because the agency that was initially planning to execute the warrant was actually a separate independent agency that's separate from the police, and they usually work to prosecute crimes and they investigate allegations pointed toward high-ranking officials.
Hmm.
So basically, they were trying to execute the warrant, and the police were they're working with the same agency to as in the part of a joint investigation unit, and the police were sort of on the side, like helping them with the investigations. But the agency said this morning that they're going to transfer the execution itself to the police. And then if the police is able to arrest Yoon at the end, then they will take over in terms of, conducting questionings and investigations afterwards.
Hmm. And we are talking about
Mhm.
the first time ever in South Korea history that there's an arrest warrant for a sitting president.
That's
But
correct.
how did the first attempt fail last week?
So to answer your question, I think it would be best to walk you through like a timeline of what happened that day.
Of course.
So the authorities they got to Yoon's residence at around in the morning at around 8 a.m. on January 3rd, and they were met with buses and and personnel from the 55th Security Brigade that prevented their entry. And then they managed to get past by going around the security and I heard that they had to walk along this like kind of a small hill that's like kind of surrounding the presidential house.
Hmm.
So they had to do that, and then they went past them, and then they got super close to the entry of the house. But then they were blocked once again from the security service as they had around 200 meters like before they reached like the official entrance of the residence building. And so then the investigative authorities and the security service, they quarreled for a little bit from 10 a.m. of the same day until 1:30. But then authorities, they decided to head back after some safety issues were raised outside of the residence where both pro and anti-Yoon protesters were conducting protests against each other. There were reports of a possible crowd crush that could happen because there were so many people that were there. And so they decided to head back, and they said that they were going to attempt a second arrest, but that didn't happen. As like I said, they decided to transfer the case to the police this morning.
Right. There seemed to be a large pro-President Yoon crowd that
Mm,
gathered outside
yes.
the residence of the president. And what are their claims for defending the president?
So those who are against the arrest, they argue that the arrest warrant that authorities have issued is actually unlawful. And that is also in line with what Yoon's legal representatives argue.
Hmm.
To explain this a little bit further, the authorities that issued the arrest warrant is the agency that like prosecutes crimes and like investigations, thus investigations of allegations involving high-ranking officials. And then Yoon's lawyers, they claim that they have no authority in issuing these warrants for crimes such as insurrection. But then the agency has been arguing that the insurrection crimes are linked to crimes that can be caused by high-ranking officials. And then they're saying that that's what makes their warrant lawful. But then what Yoon's lawyers are claiming is that there's no mentioning of insurrection, like specifically in terms of what investigations the agency can execute by law. So they are saying that it's illegal. And so his supporters are hopping onto that narrative and saying that this isn't lawful. So they should stop going with this.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And on the other side of the protesters that are
Mhm.
pro President Yoon, there's probably an even larger crowd that are against the president. And were these people angry about the failed attempt from last week?
I feel like a lot of people, they welcome the idea of the arrest warrant against President Yoon, but they do realize that proceeding with any sort of criminal investigations into Yoon could be difficult based on how there has been pretty much zero progress made by authorities when it came to just investigating Yoon when it comes to the martial law declaration. So basically, authorities they have conducted investigations on all cabinet members who presided over the cabinet meeting before martial law was declared on December 3rd, except for President Yoon. So when the police tried to conduct a search and seizure on the presidential office on December 11th, they were prohibited by the security service, who cited what's known as the Criminal Procedure Act as a reason to ban such raids from happening in locations that have official secrets. And so, because of these prior failures, people were angry at the fact that Yoon is not owning up to I'm quoting them, but like they're his own mistakes or his responsibilities,
Hmm.
like he said that he would. And so, but then they're not angry at the authorities for not being able to do so. I think it's more that they're angry at Yoon and they're angry at the fact that authorities are not able to own up to their mistakes.
And of course, the arrest warrant for President Yoon is still an
Mhm.
ongoing process and is in the
Yes.
middle of development. And it's also one incident among this whole chain of events over the past month
Mhm.
since emergency martial law on December the 3rd. And there's been one president, two acting presidents, as well as the ruling party's leader that have faced different problems. And so on December the 16th, the ruling party's leader, Han Dong-hoon, stepped down just
Mhm.
146 days after being elected. And does
Mm.
his resignation also tie into this broader case involving President Yoon?
So, as the leader of the People Power Party, which is the local party Yoon is affiliated under, he faced immense pressure during this entire crisis. And so he encouraged his party members to vote according to their conscience during the most recent impeachment proceedings. But then this led to a split within the party. And so a lot of People Power Party members came out and then they voted to impeach Yoon. And so, following Yoon's impeachment, all five members of the party's Supreme Council they resigned, and so this signaled a collapse in the party's leadership structure. So Han tried to hold on to this position, but then he eventually resigned and said that the collapse of the Supreme Council made it impossible for Han to carry out his duties. And Han's resignation is intrinsically tied to President Yoon's martial law declaration. This is because the decree not only led to Yoon's impeachment, but it also caused significant internal strife within the party. And Han's leadership was challenged as he navigated the party through the crisis, and this ultimately led to his resignation amid the fallout.
Hmm. And then at the end of 2024, on December the 27th,
Mm,
the acting president at the time, also Prime Minister Han Do-soo, was also
mm.
impeached for not cooperating with the investigation into President Yoon. And
Yes.
what was the reason for him to be reluctant to move forward with impeachment proceedings?
Han's reluctance stems from several factors, and I think I can name about three today. The first comes from local instability, as Han aimed to maintain governmental stability during a tumultuous period during his time in office. He was cautious about actions that might exacerbate political tensions or lead
Hmm.
to further polarization. And especially because, something big as martial law decree happened recently, I think he didn't
Yes.
want to intensify that further. The second comes from procedural deliberation, and this is because Han advocated for thorough deliberation and adherence to legal procedures before making decisions that could have significant constitutional ramifications. And he believed that approaching things hastily might undermine the rule of law and the democratic process. And so he has been very cautious about making certain decisions. And I think his cautiousness maybe, contributed to people saying that he's being reluctant to do things as he should be doing. And the third and last, it came from legal concerns, as Han has always expressed reservations about the constitutional implications of appointing new justices to the Constitutional Court
Hmm.
during a period of political instability. So currently, the Constitutional Court now has 8 appointed justices as of January 2nd. But back when Han was still the acting president, the court only had 6. This is enough to conduct legal proceedings, but it was considered a little weak. And because the Constitutional Court has to have a little bit more of a sturdy base to conduct impeachment procedures into President Yoon, there were a lot of people saying that they need more than 6. And so now they do, but at the time there were a little bit of concerns about that.
Right.
So I think that's where the reluctance came from in terms of Han.
Hmm. And now, as the timeline goes, now we have the second acting president, also the acting
Yes.
prime minister, Choi Sang-mok, who not only faced the political crisis, but also just a few days after he assumed the office, then there was the plane crash from the Jeju airline. So he seemed to
Yeah.
be facing both a major political and social problem. And is he also likely to face the impeachment into himself as the second acting president?
Yeah, so Choi is also under police investigation for his involvement in the events surrounding Yoon's martial law decree because he was serving as the deputy prime minister and the finance minister when martial law was declared early December. And because of that, he participated in the cabinet meeting that I told you earlier that was held before the declaration of martial law. But Choi's situation is a little different to former Prime Minister Han Duck-soo, as Han's impeachment was primarily due to his perceived obstruction of legislative processes. And he, faced criticism by the opposing party for refusing to pass bills for special counsel investigations into Yoon and the First Lady Kim Kang-hee. But Choi's investigation centers on his active participation in the cabinet meeting that supported the martial law declaration. So no one knows for sure whether he can also face impeachment, but people are saying that it is quite likely that he could be also facing that situation.
Hmm.
Currently, as acting president, Choi is also facing pressure to facilitate the arrest of President Yoon. Investigators have requested that Choi order the Presidential Security Service to comply with the arrest warrant issued against Yoon, but I believe Choi hasn't really done that so far. And this, situation itself places Choi in a really complex position because it balances the execution of legal orders with the challenges of managing a politically charged environment.
So, if the possible impeachment against Choi Sang-mok takes
Mhm,
place, and Choi
mhm.
is also sidelined, who is going to be the next person in line to lead the country?
In South Korea, there is the presidential line of succession is outlined under the Constitution. And the Constitution specifies if the president is unable to perform their duties, the prime minister assumes the role
Hmm.
of acting president. And if both the president and the prime minister are incapacitated, then the succession proceeds through the cabinet ministers in predetermined order. So now we know the president was impeached. Then
Yes.
the prime minister was also impeached. So now it's Choi. But if Choi were to be sidelined or unable to fulfill his duties, the next in line would be the Minister of Education.
Hmm.
His name's Lee Jungjoo, and will be followed by other ministers in the established order of succession.
So there's still a list of names to take over the position.
Yes, yes, there is quite a long list, but there have been other ministers who resigned from their positions, or I guess in the case of the defense minister, he got arrested because of his involvement in planning for martial law. So putting those two ministers aside, there are still quite a number of people that could be in line.
Yeah. So all these impeachments were initiated by the opposition party. And what are
Mhm.
they aiming to achieve with these impeachments and investigations? Is there a chance for the opposition party leader, Lee Jungjoo, to take the position if their plan had succeeded?
The Democratic Party has initiated impeachment proceedings and investigations with several objectives. First, the party aims to restore democratic norms as by pursuing impeachment, and they aim to uphold constitutional governance and prevent any future attempts at authoritarianism, which is what they're claiming to do. Second, it also seeks to hold Yoon accountable for what the party perceives as an unconstitutional power grab, and they've been urging the People Power Party to stop shielding Yoon from his mistakes and owning up to it and also being more honest with the citizens of South Korea. And impeachment and subsequent investigations are seen as necessary steps to address these actions and ensure that such breaches are met with appropriate consequences. Third, the party also aims to shift the political landscape into their favor, potentially leading to early elections and an opportunity to gain executive power by positioning their leader, Lee Jae-myung, as a viable candidate for presidency. So Lee has emerged as a prominent figure amid the current political turmoil, as recent polls have indicated that he holds significant lead over potential rivals. And also, Lee was Yoon's rival when they were going against each other
Hmm.
during the presidential elections a few years ago. So that's why he's also being brought up as another prominent figure as well. But Lee also faces challenges of his own as he still faces ongoing legal battles, such as his recent conviction for violating election laws. And so, though he enjoys a substantial amount of support, there are also concerns raised regarding his policy positions, particularly related to foreign policy and relations with other countries, as well as some unresolved legal issues, which also makes his path to presidency a little bit complicated.
Yeah, there are many people that were frustrated on the
Hmm.
president Yoon Suk-yeol himself, but
Yeah.
following all these impeachments against the first acting president and the possible impeachment against the second acting president, and also possibly a list of names from the cabinet to
Mhm.
assume the president's role, are people starting to, let's say, get a bit tired of this power struggle between the opposition party and the ruling party?
For just from the people that I know people are very getting extremely tired. And because of this power struggle, I remember somebody pointed out to me, they were saying that now politics in Korea, it's not about making things better for the country or like
Hmm.
actually literally trying to achieve what's truly good for the country. But rather, when it comes to presidential elections, these candidates are pointing out things that are wrong about each other instead of saying, oh, here are some things that I can do that makes this country better. So, since a lot of people are saying that, they are saying that this makes it reluctant for them to vote in the future because they
Hmm.
are now saying, I don't see what's the difference between these two parties anymore. I don't see what the difference between these politicians.
Right.
And so people are getting really tired of this power struggle, definitely. And I think most people, based on what's happened so far, they just want a complete redo of the whole political structure. And they just want like completely different people to come up and because they were willing to seek for change and like true changes that could, make things better for Korea in terms of economically and I guess many other social issues that have been raised so far. Mm.
So people are getting tired of this power play between the
Yeah.
political parties, but in real life, are people's life and work being affected by this political struggle? Especially now we're talking amid the investigation into the Jeju airline plane crash.
So daily life and work is still going on, but the recent plane crash at Muan International Airport has had a big impact on Koreans' lives. Several Koreans have expressed that they felt secondhand trauma and like depression from being exposed to the news about the crisis. South Korea also issued the national mourning period until January 4th, so which was over 2 days ago. And
Hmm.
but joint memorial altars are still set up at the airport and also in 17 cities and provinces across the country. protests urging for Yoon's exit were also temporarily halted for some time and only recently picked up its pace. So people are going to work, to school, they're doing their daily routine, but there is a really heavy atmosphere that lingers above everybody. The recent martial law decree was intense, and I think people were still sort of learning to cope and, get over from that. But
Yes.
then this tragedy really did the damage for a lot of people. And with investigations still ongoing for the plane crash, and, mixed emotions are expected to go around in Koreans as the cause behind the crash is still yet to be revealed. But I feel like even if this cause is to be revealed, I'm not sure if people will ever fully recover because a lot of people are saying that this really could have happened to anybody. Like
Mm,
anybody could have been on that plane. And people, they are flying around all the time, whether that may be they're going to some place far or whether that means that they're going to someplace close, like that's just in Korea itself. So I feel like, trauma or I guess negative emotions that currently linger will sort of go on for some time, even if, some a certain amount of time passes.
yes. As you pointed out earlier, that
Mhm.
the first acting president, Han Do-soo, was reluctant to move forward with the impeachment against President Yoon because he
Mhm.
wanted to prevent further polarization within the country. And now this political crisis feels very much like a tug of war between the ruling
Yeah.
party and the opposition party. Now, has the political crisis raised discussions on the political system and, let's say, a possible prevention mechanism in the future to stop such thing from happening again?
So, several discussions about Korea's political system and the need for preventive mechanisms, they have been raised by analysts and scholars, not necessarily by politicians.
Hmm.
But these experts have pointed out vulnerabilities in Korea's political framework that may have facilitated the crisis. And one of the problems that they pointed out was concentration of power, where the existing system grants a substantial amount of authority to the president which without, adequate checks and balances, it can lead to unilateral decisions being made that may undermine democratic norms like martial law.
Hmm.
And they also criticize Korea's 5-year non-renewable single-term presidency, which can result in a lack of accountability and short-term policy planning, as there is really no opportunities for re-election based on their performance.
Hmm.
And in response to these critiques, several reforms have also been proposed, such as a transition to a semi-presidential system, which is kind of a system where executive powers are shared between the president and the prime minister. And so within this model, the president would focus on, let's say, things like foreign policy, while the prime minister is holds themselves accountable to legislature, who would also handle domestic affairs. And these experts are saying that this division could provide a more balanced distribution of power and enhance governmental stability. And recent opinion polls, they have indicated that there's a significant portion of South Koreans that support reforms to limit presidential powers. For instance, a survey by this group called Opinion Research Justice found that 56% of its respondents favored some form of presidential reform, either by reducing certain powers or by transitioning to a semi-presidential system.
Hmm. As we record this episode, is still on January the 6th, amid very rapid development of this chain of events. And
Yes.
Jungjoo, thank you very much for dissecting this whole political landscape for us. It's not an easy job.
Thank you for having me.
After negotiations with the CIO, the anti-corruption agency, South Korean police announced that executing the arrest warrant for President Yoon Suk-yeol falls under the jurisdiction of the CIO, not the police. However, the police stated that if a second attempt is made, they may arrest anyone who obstructs the process. And that brings us to the end of this episode of Deep Dive. If you enjoyed what you just heard, don't forget to follow us on your podcast platforms. Just search for Deep Dive. You can also leave a comment to let us know what you want to learn about China and beyond. This episode is brought to you by me, Lee Jungjoo, and my colleagues Zhang Zhang and Qi Zhi. Special thanks to the Korean Herald reporter Lee Jungjoo. I'll see you in the next one.